Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is with reference to the situation in Gaza, and of course something that we've been seeing continuing since October, the genocide against the people of Palestine in Gaza, somewhere where we don't see any safe place for the Gazans and the Palestinians to stay with regards to any action that is being taken by Israel and its allies. And so we're going to be, of course, taking a closer look at what is developing in Gaza, particularly in terms of what is happening to the people who unfortunately are facing this genocide with more than 40,000 people who have been killed and more than 2.3 million who have been displaced, and of course the many atrocities that we keep on hearing on an daily basis. There is, of course, also the concerns with reference to what this means for an all-out conflict and escalation, especially after attacks by Israel in Lebanon and Iran, and the possibility of retaliation in the Middle East by Iran and an escalation of the current issues. There is, of course, also the effort that the US seems to be playing with regards to what it's calling ceasefire talks, something that had happened earlier in Qatar and is now also going to be held in Egypt. And while, of course, we take a closer look at this, it seems that there isn't much that has been done to achieve any sort of agreement between what Hamas has agreed to previously, but brought, of course, also by the US, and what Israel seems to be demanding now, and what seems to be part of the so-called bridging proposal that the US has come up with Israel. Hamas, of course, has said that this is something that is a bridge between Israel and the US and not Israel and Hamas or Palestine. And so we're going to be taking a look at the number of conditions, of course, as part of this proposal, and whether or not it will ultimately lead to an end of the genocide in Gaza and, of course, ease of the suffering of the people there. That is going to be our focus in the first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to take a look at the current economic situation of the country, and of course the way that the Prime Minister of Pakistan has announced a number of measures in this regard, including, of course, a 5-year economic revival program, which he's, of course, said has been deliberated upon months and with many stakeholders, and something that he's going to be announcing very soon. He, of course, talked about the reforms, particularly digitalization of FBR, as something that will help not only tax revenue collection, but also, of course, improve the overall economic condition of the country. These were also words that were echoed by the Finance Minister, in which he, of course, also expressed the fact that structural reforms are always on the agenda, and this is something that Pakistan is working with full force towards, and is, of course, something that also factors in the negotiations with the IMF regarding the EFF. He also talked about how the concerns or criticism with regards to a delay in the agenda of the board taking up Pakistan's issue is unfounded, and this is something that Pakistan is constantly in touch with the IMF for, and something that Pakistan expects to happen in September. Now, there is also, of course, the commitments from bilateral and developmental partners, which Pakistan also has to ensure before that actually happens. And so we're going to take a closer look at whether or not that is an actual hindrance at the current step. And then, of course, the way forward in terms of improving the way that remittances are sent into the country, and, of course, more digitalization in terms of the transfer of money, and how that has now been also done in partnership with the Arab Monetary Fund, and will be, of course, one very important step further towards digitalization of the economy and improvement in the economic sector, especially across border transactions. So we're going to be taking a look at this in our second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts FarrukhPitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment, we've also been joined by former Ambassador Mr. Qazilbash. Thank you very much, Mr. Fit, for joining us and being a part of the discussion on Gaza, and, of course, what is happening on ground and what can possibly be expected when we talk about the way this is now evolving. And I'll start with you, Mr. Rifat, in terms of what is happening at the moment. It seems there are lots of reports coming in with regards to what they're calling ceasefire talks, but it seems that when we take a closer look at what is actually being discussed and what sort of conditions or aspects of the proposal are being put forward and supported by the US, it seems that it is perhaps less of a ceasefire arrangement, but something just to sort of deter any possibility of an all-out attack against Israel at the current moment, and not really centered around the suffering of the people of Palestine. But I'd like your perspective on this as well, and whether or not you think that is true.
I'm happy for the detailed introduction that you've given on this subject. There have been many discussions on ceasefire for a while. And if you recall, Hamas had agreed to a ceasefire proposal back in May, which had been put forward by the United States.
Yes.
But then Israel backed out from it. And I think it is the intentions behind the ceasefire proposals that we need to look at. And it's quite clear that even the latest proposal, which is known as the bridging proposal, it doesn't really address the real issue of the Palestinian question. In other words, what's going to happen to the people of Gaza, what Israel plans to do after a ceasefire is in place, how will these people be settled back, will humanitarian assistance be allowed to come in? So, of course, Palestinians and the people of Gaza and Hamas, who are, in fact, if you remember, they are an elected government, they are the representatives of the people of Gaza. They see that there's no guarantees in this ceasefire proposal, and therefore they have rejected it. And it just shows, I think what is important to remember is that the United States is very keen on a ceasefire, not because of any affiliation that it has to the Palestinians or the fact that it wants to really resolve the Palestine question. It is basically trying to continue to protect its ally Israel and to just buy time. This is a buying time kind of proposal because it wants to, the elections are coming up in the United States in November, and they want, the Biden administration wants that they should have some form of ceasefire in place before the election so that they can present that as a victory for their government. And secondly, the Americans are also aware that after the recent spate of assassinations that took place of the Hezbollah leader and of Hamas leader in Tehran, the possibility of this war expanding into the region and Iran becoming involved in it are also very much there. So the Americans do want to avoid that. And therefore, they're basically just buying time. Whereas Hamas is not ready to buy time. Hamas wants, and rightly so, the Palestinians want, that if there's a ceasefire in place, it should be something which is acceptable to all parties and something which is sustainable also.
Right, absolutely. And that is, of course, a fair demand. But I also want your perspective in terms of the possibility of that actually happening, particularly as you said, the US is very keen, but again, for other reasons. And so I want your perspective in terms of whether or not there can possibly be any step from Israel or from the US that actually moves towards the proposal that was earlier discussed in May and towards what Hamas is actually demanding for. Because it seems that while we see that there is that sort of pressure or there is that move that we have been seeing from the US and Israel side to actually go forward with something, but it seems that perhaps Mr. Netanyahu is not going as far as what Hamas is actually looking for. And so if that won't be the case, what do you expect to happen?
You see, as I said in the beginning, the question is of intentions. Israel does not intend to have a ceasefire. Israel is not eager for a ceasefire. Israel wants to continue the war. And that's for several reasons. The first reason is, of course, Netanyahu's own political future. He knows that he has, Israel, I think, realizes that by the response that after the 7th of October attack by Hamas, the fact that Hamas was able to infiltrate into Israel without their knowledge, it was a failure of their intelligence, a failure of their security, a failure of their own military. And Israel has this image in the world of being a very militarized country. And if an organization like Hamas could infiltrate and take so many people hostages and kill so many Israelis, this actually shows the weaknesses and the fissures within Israel. And so Netanyahu has come under a lot of pressure within his country, not to solve the Palestinian issue, not to leave Gaza, but the fact that his actions have not produced the kind of results that the Israelis wanted him to produce. So he wants to continue this war to save his own face. Secondly, he wants, Israel is an imperialist power. They're an expansionist power. They want to expand into the Middle East. Hamas And Gaza and Palestine are not their target. What they want is they want to the greater Middle East or the greater Israel policy and the fact that Israel wants to take over parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria, and even neutralize Iran. So you see, whatever proposal comes in, um, Netanyahu may want to buy time, but he is not serious about a real ceasefire. He is not serious about ending the war. He wants to finish Hamas, and that is the aim of the United States as well. And Hamas sees it. Hamas sees that this is all a game. This is all just to buy time and to commit more atrocities against the Palestinians. And Hamas is hoping. It's unfortunate. I don't see it happening, but the Palestinians and Hamas are probably hoping that the rest of the Arab countries and the Muslim world will realize the kind of realpolitik that the Americans and the Israelis are playing at and come together and put pressure on America, on the United States, to seriously have some kind of ceasefire talks and to seriously stop Israel from continuing its genocide. Because on the one hand, they are supplying weapons to Israel. Aircraft carriers are U.S. aircraft carriers are going into the near Israel. Military equipment is being supplied, and on the other hand, they're talking about ceasefire. So this kind of double game, both the Palestinians see it, Hamas sees it, and everybody sees it. But I think that I don't see it working. I don't see a ceasefire coming about. I feel that this conflict will continue, and this conflict has every possibility of expanding into the rest of the region.
Of course, Ambassador Saba, that point is well taken. Particularly earlier when you were talking about the provisional nature of this proposal, that is also in the name. It is called Buttigieg proposal. But there's one question, regardless of what you were saying about Israel's position. Let us focus on America's interventions or the possibility of America's positioning. So, regarding the previous proposal and now this, do you think that this retreat from the US is permanent from the previous proposal to this one, or there is a possibility of US actually changing position and reverting to the previous proposal?
And regarding face saving, with reference to what you talked about Netanyahu, I want your take on whether that face saving can actually come from a continued genocide and conflict in the Middle East, or will that come from a facade of a ceasefire arrangement, whatever it may be. It may not be real in either case, but it seems that it is also difficult to even portray the continual of this genocide increasingly for Israel too.
And Ambassador Rifat, if you could also shed some light on when we talk about the proposals, one of the proposals which actually came from the Israeli side, they said that why not open the borders with the Egypt and send all of the Gazans into Sinai Peninsula and give us time to, of course, counter Hamas, and we simply want to eliminate Hamas. How authentic this proposal is, and is it acceptable to all of the stakeholders, including Egypt itself?
Okay, so these are three separate questions. The first about the United States position. Let me make it very clear that the United States has only one interest in this region, apart from the economic interest, which is the oil. But it has one interest, and that is sustaining Israel as a country, as an independent, legitimate country in their view. Because Israel is their ally in the Middle East. We have seen changes in the geopolitical strategies, changes taking place in the Middle East, where we see China taking a big role, we see Russia taking a big role, and the United States, it was felt that was taking a back step. So they want to make sure that Israel remains strong, Israel remains independent, and Israel's identity is not compromised. Now, with this as the background, any ceasefire proposal that the United States would put forward will never, ever compromise on Israel's position. They will always try to make some kind of adjustments. As I said, they want to buy time because the policy of both Israel and the United States is one when it comes to the Palestinian question and when it comes to Hamas. For Palestinian question, you remember this is an old issue, a historical issue, in which they want that Israel should remain as a state, independent state, and Palestinian state can be alongside it, although it's a squeeze state with West Bank and Gaza. On the question of Hamas, they want to annihilate it totally, both Israel and America. So, therefore, in my view, any kind of ceasefire proposal that comes in from the United States will never, ever compromise on Israel's basic principle, and that is to remain there as an independent country and to continue to subjugate the Palestinians. Now, when it comes to Netanyahu,
Ambassador Sir, sorry to cut you, but you earlier actually drew a distinction between Israel's position and Netanyahu's position. Do you think that the US policy towards both is going to be the same?
No. I wanted to clarify. When I said earlier about Netanyahu's position as being on the back foot, that is not, as I said at that time also, it is not on the question of Palestine. It is not on the question of the existence of Israel. The reason why Netanyahu is facing any kind of a resistance within his own country is because of his policy, the way he has gone about trying to resolve this issue of 7th October. The fact that the hostages have not come back, it's going to be a year now, and hostages have not returned. And therefore, the Israelis are angry with Netanyahu, not because he has taken on the Gazans, not because he's taken on the Palestinians, no, or the fact that he's taken on Hamas, or the fact that he's taken on Hezbollah, no. What they are angry about is that Netanyahu, Israel, a country which is heavily militarized, supported by the United States, has not been able to take back its hostages and has not been able to resolve the issue. So he is facing internal problems in that. When it comes to saving face, which I think was another question, yes, because it is a sense of embarrassment for Israel. You see, Israel has, I think, now at least realized that it cannot win this war on its own. That is why it is trying to drag in as many of the US and Western allies that it can. The United States is already very much into this war. Previously, the United States would act as a mediator. Now it is actually in the war simply because it's been supplying weapons for the war. If aircraft carriers are going into the Red Sea, if military equipment is being sent to Israel, on the one hand, they are sending in all this equipment to strengthen Israel, to fight Hamas, and on the other hand, they're talking about a ceasefire. So, this is a double-faced and two-faced thing. So Israel wants that the longer this conflict continues, because, don't forget, Israel's final target, it's not Palestine, it's not Lebanon, it's not Syria, it's Iran. Iran is the enemy number one of Israel because they know that the Iranians, because of the sanctions and because of the fact that the Iranians may have some kind of a nuclear capability, Israel feels threatened by Iran. And both the United States and Israel want to neutralize Iran. So I think this is a much, much bigger, much, much more complicated game that's at play. And the poor Gazans are the target because they are facing the famine. They are being killed every day. Genocide is taking place at unprecedented levels. But I think what you have to realize is that, number one, the Israelis are not against Netanyahu's policy of neutralizing Hamas or Iran. What they are against is his policy of not being able to bring the hostages back, and the fact that there is a weakness in Israel which has been exposed to the world. Now, there was a third point also, which I'm sorry Oh yes. Now, you see, now the thing is, this is a very interesting thing, where you would expect that Arab countries and neighboring countries who are not only Arab but Muslim countries, and they have a historical relationship with Palestine, and you would expect that they would try to help the refugees, instead of the Gazans being pushed into a corner first in Rafah, and then Rafah was bombed as well, and now they're totally in a corner. Egypt has closed its borders. And Egypt knows that if it opens its borders to the Palestinians, there'll be an influx of Palestinians coming in, and it could also become a target of Israeli bombardment, and Egypt will not accept that. So therefore, Israel is playing a very clever game in trying to draw in the other Arab countries into this conflict. This is one way of doing it, by attacking Lebanon, Hezbollah in Lebanon, by trying to push the refugees into Egypt or into Syria or Jordan. If you notice, Jordan actually also is not taking in refugees. Jordan, in fact, opened its airspace to the Israeli planes. So, Israel is trying to push these countries into trying to come into the conflict so that it has an excuse of then bombing Jordan, bombing Egypt, bombing Lebanon, and then spreading the conflict. And Egypt will never do that. Jordan will never do it because they want to save their own, they have their own humanitarian issues to deal with, and they do not wish. Now, this is the sad part, that, these are Muslim countries, these are Arab countries who are just closing their doors on their fellow Palestinians who need help at this point.
Absolutely, and this is an important point, Mr. Rifat, and I want to explore it a bit further because unfortunately, as you said earlier, it's going to be a year very soon, and this was something horrific that started back in October, and there was so much talk about what has been going on, and there are still some very brave people both on ground around the world who have been raising voices for the Palestinians. At the same time, though, we have seen that despite all of that, it has gone up to a year, and while we talk about the politics of it all, there are people losing their children, horribly so, every day, their entire families, and the kind of things that they're facing is, of course, unbelievable and something very, very tough to even imagine. And so despite all of what has been happening on ground, we see that all of these interests and the economy of it all plays a very important role in what is going on. And of course, what can expect the Muslim world to actually do something for their fellow brethren, but it's not happening, and perhaps unfortunately not the way the world works as well. So I want your take on what exactly will possibly push this to the edge where it is absolutely impossible for people not to do something about it. Is there a red line for that even? I mean, one would think it has been crossed ages ago, but is there something that can possibly turn this around?
And Ambassador Saiba, if you can also highlight the role of WHO when it comes to Israel putting sanctions on what can get into Gaza and what can't be, especially related to all of the cleaning products, soaps, shampoos, all of these things, they are banned, and this is actually causing for the kids, causing skin diseases. At the same time, polio itself is being alerted in Gaza. And if we talk about mothers of Gaza or pregnant women of Gaza, they are at a risk as well. I mean, they have been at risk before, but they are more at risk now. And malnutrition is the biggest challenge as well. What is WHO doing on it?
You see, I think one thing that this Hamas-Israel conflict in Gaza has exposed is how weak the international system is. The fact that Israel, a small country, yet a very powerful country because it's got a powerful ally. We should not look at Israel as Israel. We should actually look at it as the United States sitting in the Middle East. They have flouted every single international convention when it comes to any kind of humanitarian assistance or any kind of political decision to be taken to end the conflict. They have flouted every single convention. The United Nations Secretary General has pleaded over and over again, but it has no effect. Neither Israel cares, nor the United States cared. The International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, they have claimed that Israel has committed genocide, but it has no effect on Israel. So in fact, what this conflict has exposed is the weakness of the international system itself. The fact that children are dying not only of malnutrition, but now, as you mentioned yourself, polio outbreaks have broken out over there. Hospital facilities are not there. There's a medical emergency for women, children, elderly, and the world is just talking about it. There's a lot of talk about it. The television channels are full of images. The social media is full of images, but nothing actually is happening on ground because there is this one country which just refuses to budge, and which shows that perhaps we need to actually revisit this entire international system and see that how is it possible that you have the United Nations, you have its affiliated, its specialized agencies like the WHO, like UNICEF, like UNHCR, I mean, so many others, and like the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, and nothing is of any significance to one country which continues its genocide, which continues its atrocity, and the world just watches. So I think this is a very important point to note, and I think the media should highlight it, that we have an innate weakness in this international system, which needs to be
Ms. Rifat, I actually want to explore that a bit more as well, especially when we talk about the weakness or perhaps the non-existence of this international system. It's something that we sort of already know, don't we? I mean, there are so many other examples also of impunity, of no consequences, of violations of international law taking place without anything really happening. And so we know that the actual system in place is something else, governed by very different factors. And so how is it that when you say we need to revisit this international system, how will it actually be done practically? Because I don't understand that quite clearly. It's very, very hard actually to move power from one place to other just because of paperwork or establishing systems, because perhaps that's not the way power dynamics work in the first place. So how do you shift that power from where it is now to any international system we may employ in the future?
You see, the thing is, I don't think you need to unravel the system. I'm against that. I think that the system is there. It makes sense. What we have to see actually is how to improve the system. Now you have a United Nations, which has a Security Council and a General Assembly. The General Assembly has overwhelmingly voted in favor of the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine and called for an immediate ceasefire so that, humanitarian assistance can go in. But the United Nations Security Council, whereas it has a system of veto, just one country can say no and nothing happens. And there's a whole new debate. I think this is a different. This is a time for a different question on how the UN system can be improved, how the UN system can be reformed, so that it's more democratic. And the system of veto, which exists in the UN Security Council, which harms actually, which is more damaging, especially for countries of the South and the developing world, how that can be, changed and how that can be made more democratic. That's a different debate. And I think we shouldn't get confused. But what I'm trying to say is that the UN system needs it. This conflict has shown, if not others, you are absolutely right. Kashmir is one issue. There are so many other issues where resolutions are not followed, or people just flout them. But I think this conflict has shown and continues to show that the UN system, the international system, really needs some reform, some ways to improve it. And that can only happen with the international community itself. It can only happen when the UN Security Council itself becomes a bit more democratic in nature, rather than the way it is right now, with one country deciding to veto any resolution that comes in, and no steps are taken forward in that.
Absolutely. Ms. Rifat, I also want to talk about in the same aspect in terms of how change can actually come about, the power of international opinion, the power of the public at large, the power of the people on the streets, the many that have spoken in front of their governments, who have come out and voiced their opinions all across the world with reference to what is going on in Gaza, continue to do so. I want your take on the power of this international opinion and the people at large to change things, and whether or not you think that has actually also contributed to the kind of pressures that perhaps Israel or the US are facing right now.
And Ambassador Rifat, I'm glad that you have highlighted the shortcomings of United Nations right now. Can we say that as we saw in the previous century, we saw League of Nations failing to do something about Nazis in 30s, and that's why we headed towards another war, and that actually disbanded the League of Nations. And now can we say that as we had Nazis at that time in play who destroyed League of Nations, we can say the Ashkenazis are doing the same thing, and they are actually destroying the United Nations, and we might have to have another system in place in coming future?
You know, if you recall, the League of Nations failed because Hitler was able to come into power and the Second World War happened. And when the United Nations was formed, the whole idea was that we cannot have another world war. Now, when they talk about a world war, they're basically talking about a war because the first two wars took place on European soil. And although they were spread out because most of those European countries were colonizers, so it spread to other parts of the world, but the main stage of the two wars was Europe. And of course, Europe is what matters, West is what matters. Now, that's why United Nations was set up. Now, United Nations was set up and they said there will not be another world war. So we have not seen a world war so far. We have seen regional conflicts. We have seen conflicts that are taking place within countries. We are seeing conflicts taking place in far off regions away from Europe. So Europe is, as so far, it is safe. Now, Ukraine, which is of course another topic of discussion, but Ukraine has also shown that the war can come close to European borders. And if God forbid, this war, this conflict of Hamas and Israel is expanded into the rest of the Middle East and the rest of the region, which includes not only West Asia, but parts of South Asia, Middle East, North Africa, then we have the danger of a regional war expanding and turning into a world war. But we pray that that does not happen. We hope and pray that the United Nations, the people sitting on the helm of affairs in the Security Council will see the red flags. They will see the dangers, that if you draw in other countries into this conflict, it can become a big conflagration, it can be spread, and it can actually threaten the UN system itself. I don't want that to happen. I hope and pray it doesn't happen, but it seems that the way things are going and the fact that Israel is continuing with its policy of trying to, don't forget, if you recall, last year, September, in the UN General Assembly, when Prime Minister Netanyahu made his speech, he showed a map. He showed a map of the Middle East, of Greater Israel, in which Palestine did not exist. And this was a map showing the future of what the Middle East would look like. And it was all Israel, all across, even down to the Arabian Peninsula. So this is an imperialist, expansionist power. And unless it is curtailed, it has the danger of spreading the war and becoming a world war. Now, coming to the question about the power of the people, you know, this year has been a year of elections. You all know, you've been covering it on your own television channel. Practically every other country in the world has gone into elections. And you see that especially in the Western world and even in the United States, the people's power has come out very strongly in support of the Palestinians and of Gaza. They may still support Israel. I mean, it's very important to remember that the people who are coming out protesting against Israel's atrocities against the people of Gaza does not mean that they are against the existence of Israel. This is a very important distinction that has to be made. They may be anti-Zionist, they may be anti-Israeli policy right now, but if you were to ask these very people who are on the streets supporting the Gazans right now, they would never say that, no, we don't want Israel to finish, we don't want Palestinians to get their homeland. No, there the question remains. There it is very clear that they want the Israeli system to continue. They just want Israel to stop its atrocities against the Gazans. And they have had an effect. I mean, the elections that have taken place, you've seen governments changed. You've seen that people have been able to mobilize themselves, and they have had an impact. But it's very important to remember that the bottom line is, for the Europeans, for the Western powers especially, that the existence of Israel is not to be challenged. That will remain. And Palestinians, okay, you can have a two-state solution, You can have the Palestinians pushed into the corner to the West Bank or to Gaza. You can have Palestinians, but not a homeland for Palestine and not a homeland for Israel. No, that question does not arise. Israel has to continue its existence, and Palestine can also find a place there. I think you have to be very, very clear about the people's power as well. The people's power has been in support of Gaza, but not necessarily against the existence of Israel as an independent state.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Qazilbash, for joining us and being a part of the discussion and sharing your very valuable views with us on this show. Farrukh, I'd like your take as well on this. At the end, if we take a look at the situation, what do you make of it and whether or not we're actually moving towards any peace?
I don't think so that we are moving towards any peace at all. I've actually made it clear in the previous discussions also. Number one, the distinction that I was talking about between Netanyahu and Israel's interest is that whatever Netanyahu is doing is not serving Israel's cause. It has exposed Israel to more scrutiny, and that will continue. Israel's ruler will continue to cling to power, but at the cost of Israel's long-term interest. And of course, you were talking about this international system. I don't think there is much hope of reform, because it was a post-World War world order where there wasn't any clear polarity, and immediately it was thrust into a bipolar world, and now it still pretends that the world is a unipolar entity. So I don't think that there is a possibility of any reform. Whatever Murphy's law, whatever can go wrong will go wrong.
Yeah, of course, that is something that we've been seeing, unfortunately, for quite some time now. But we really hope that there is some possibility of change. And it seems bleak, but that's what we hold on to. Faisal, I'd like your take now on our second segment, in which we're going to be talking about the current economic situation of the country and what the Prime Minister has, of course, spoken about in terms of the economic revival and the 5-year plan. And then, of course, what the Finance Minister has also reiterated in terms of his efforts for structural reform and, of course, talks with the IMF. What do you make of the kind of aspects that we've, of course, previously discussed as well in terms of what the Finance Ministry and the government is doing in this regard, but what possibly has also been talked about in terms of the issues or reasons of delay with the IMF? It seems that this is something now the Finance Minister sees happening in September.
Yes, and obviously if we look at the current situations, of course, you know, the current government, it has been, since the day one, they have been trying their best to, of course, contain all of the pressures on economy of Pakistan, and somehow they had the plan related to IMF bailout. And we know that the government was, since the day one, in the talks with the IMF and to secure the bailout. And so far, the recommendations which were recommended by IMF, of course, the compliance from the government side was there. And now we know that by the end of this month, we were expecting that the bailout will be secured on the reasons that one of the expectations was from the IMF side that Pakistan should talk to China, Saudi Arabia and UAE for the rollover of the existing debts of nearly $12 billion. And so far we know UAE has accepted that, and of course the rollover has taken place with the UAE, but rest of the $11 billion, still we are in the negotiations with both Saudi Arabia and China.
And do you think we'll be having that done before September?
Yeah, next month, of course, the next meeting is next month, and before that, of course, efforts are being made by you know, our Minister of Finance and government itself. And to me, I think they will be able to manage that. And further down, of course, the other recommendations related to, you know, tax nets and each and everything, Pakistan has complied with the IMF. Only to, of course, further strengthen Pakistan's pace in terms of, you know, stabilizing Pakistan's economy. So far, we can say that there are a few hurdles, but we are on a route to secure ourselves.
All right. Farrukh, as part of the economic revival program and what the Prime Minister also mentioned earlier today, he talked about digitalization and something that he's also looking forward to in terms of the FBR. And this is something the Finance Minister also said will improve not just the mechanisms of different institutions, but also, of course, ease of business in general and attracting investors. And then there's also, of course, the partnership with the Arab Monetary Fund in terms of a more efficient and smoother way of the transactions across border and remittances coming into Pakistan. How much of these efforts do you think will truly help our economy?
The latter part is essentially what we need, because there used to be a lot of hundi and hawala. And because of those illegal channels, which have now almost been stopped, I think that we needed some other measure to contribute to the repatriation or patriation of remittances. But then, of course, there are many other ways to undercut the existing system. You have seen how cryptocurrencies work across various countries. So I think that this Bunar Raj system is going to be most welcome, and hopefully in coming days we are going to see improvement. Regarding digitization of records of FPR and then possibly automation, if that happens, I think we can improve upon the tax collection system and expanding the tax net. Mercifully, recently there was a very good change at the top of FBR. A very capable person actually took over, but we still have to wait and see how things actually carry forward. For now, at least, there are many other reforms that we need, and the biggest problem is that we need the actual reform that we need is in our governance model, which we haven't been able to improve, especially at the grassroots level. And because of that, a lot of development fund is wasted or diverted to political interest. And because of that, this country keeps on bleeding money. So without that kind of reform, of course, we are going to balance the books as was asked by IMF. But our children having better future, better life than us, that is still a far cry.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. Faisal, I also want your take on the 5-year plan that the Prime Minister spoke about. And while, of course, he speaks about how this is something that has been deliberated upon for months, has taken the input of many, many stakeholders, and he will be announcing it very soon. And, of course, something that we definitely need and something that the Prime Minister actually spoke about first day in office as well. So in terms of what that can possibly include, what expectations would you have from it?
Yes, and obviously when we talk about the 5-year plan, of course we know that SIFC has already been working extensively on exploring Pakistan's resources, and of course wherever it was required, of course they have been doing it. And that 5-year plan has a lot to do with of course improving Pakistan's agriculture sector, including the agri-tech in agriculture, so that we can enhance our crops, and rather than self-containing ourselves, self-feeding, we can of course export the food products as well from Pakistan. And if we talk about IT sector, the focus is going to be on the IT sector, because we have already been we have always been talking in our show as well that Pakistan has the capacity to of course meet the challenges in terms of producing IT sector services. And if we look at countries like India that are earning more than $105 billion in terms of their IT products that they are exporting, Pakistan in IT exports, it has always been said that Pakistan has the capacity of course crossing $50 billion in terms of IT exports. So far we have already been only been doing around $2.8 billion, which can be of course improved every year. So within that 5-year, of course every year we will be seeing that improvement would be there. And if we talk about minerals, Pakistan is exploring the minerals, and of course Pakistan has the plan related to of course mining and minerals and all of these exports. Pakistan needs to expand it, and Pakistan of course wants to improve its energy crisis as well. In that context, because we know that in past, I mean, our industrial sectors, they have been facing challenges in terms of energy crisis, and that if is dealt with, of course, Pakistan's industries, they will take benefit out of it, and the industries that were stopped in past, they will be revived once more.
Right, of course, that is the hope, and we hope that we actually achieve that. And the Finance Minister, of course, has been reiterating how that is something that we are striving towards, and that is, of course, echoed by the Prime Minister too. Thank you, Faisal, and thank you for joining us in the debate as always. That's all that we have time for, and we'll be back with more news from Pakistan and around the world. Stay tuned to B2B World.